Dang, I got it. Okay. My name is Antone Aboud. I'm with the teaching interests section. This is a newly formed section by LYRA. The section is committed to promoting constructive dialogue with respect to higher education and outreach activities that help us effectively teach labor and employment relations content. Our application for membership as a new intersection identified 5 types of activities we'll pursue, one of which is to develop session proposals for national LYRA meetings, the reason we gathered today, of course. To begin our project this year, we solicited proposals from all faculty members associated with LYRA regarding innovations in class. We received 16 submissions to review. From the submissions, we selected 3, which we believe will provide a range of options others might consider adopting. Each presenter will speak for 10 minutes. At the conclusion of the presentations, we will entertain questions. Please feel free to enter the questions into the chat pod, or you can raise your hand and ask the question. We'll do our best to make sure all the questions get answered. Let me take just a minute and introduce our speakers. Our first speaker will be Alicia Plemmons, an assistant professor and economics program director in the Department of Economics and Finance at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville. Alicia will discuss class activities involving engaged scholarship. Our second speaker will be Angela Cornell. Angela is a clinical professor at Cornell University Law School and founding director of the Labor Law Clinic, and will discuss the integration of advocacy into classrooms. Our final speaker will be Robert Hickey, an associate professor of industrial relations in the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Queen's University, Ontario. Robert will discuss the manner in which he has integrated experiential learning into his classes. Alicia is going to be our initial speaker. So, Alicia, why don't you go ahead and, if you want to introduce yourself a bit more, and go ahead with your presentation.
Well, I already appreciate the introduction. I mean, you already did a good enough job. There's not much I can add. One thing I do want to say is for anybody who I might follow up with later, that I'm actually leaving Southern Illinois University Edwardsville at the end of summer, which is very sad. But I'm moving to West Virginia University, where a majority of my job will actually be to set up a lot of these different experiences for students. So I'm very excited. It's something I'm engaged in, and I really, really enjoy it. So let's talk about. I know I'm calling it experiential learning, and it's more the third presentation, but it's just a little bit easier from how I like to discuss it. Working with local governments. So thinking about the labor perspective, labor is not only in the private sector, it is always in the is also in the public sector. The public sector is one of the largest employers of people in the United States, and understanding how to work with them and how to get students engaged with them, I think, is very important for the student perspective. So I want to tell you about what my students have focused on in one of my classes, and one of the activities that they've had engaging with the city of East St. Louis, that we'll go a little bit more into in a minute. And then outside of that, I want to talk a little bit about how you might be able to replicate similar activities within your own classrooms. So with that, I'm going to basically break this down into 3 main sections. First, I'm going to tell you about the class itself and the City of East St. Louis collaborative project that we worked on. Second, I'm going to talk a little bit about training students to work with civic leaders. It turns out it's a whole different ballgame, and it's very important skills for them to learn if they want to engage in this sort of activism or working with their state and local authorities. Third, I'm going to talk a little bit about assessments. Don't worry, I'm not going to bore you with a whole bunch of statistics, but I am going to tell you what the students felt about their outcomes and what the local government felt about these outcomes. So about the course itself, this is Econ 445, Public Sector Economics, State and Local. Basically what we do is we focus on expenditures and taxation of local and state governments. I mean, this is very important because many of my students, they want to be employers, they want to be union representatives, they want to work in occupational licensing. Knowing how to work within this framework or work with their local and state representatives is very important. So this is a class typically taken by upper level students, about 50-50 juniors and seniors. It's not a required course, but recommended for anybody who wants to work in policy analysis, public sector, and it's very project focused. So we spend the first 8 weeks focused on expenditures of state and local governments. And then the second 8 weeks, we focus on taxation and revenues. That's where this project that I'm going to talk about comes in. So let me tell you a little bit about the city of East St. Louis. So we see it right here. We have St. Louis on the left. We have our fantastic Mississippi River. And then we have this small area right here, which is the city of East St. Louis. It's a fantastic community. They've been around for 100, 150 years as a thriving community, but they've also had some hiccups along the way that they were wanting help with. So in this particular problem that we identified, because I love to go to the local meetings, I love talking with different leaders within our community and how our students can be engaged, we identified a problem with the city of East St. Louis. COVID-19 showed them that they had a heavy reliance on tax revenues from the local casinos. Well, when the casinos shut down for COVID, all of a sudden their budgets were out the window and they were in a territory that they hadn't necessarily been at before. Now, this is also a community that has a lot of marginalized community members, as well as a lot of socioeconomic issues involved with it as well. The median household income is about $25,000. About a third of residents live in poverty, but they're all really good people who care about their community. They couldn't afford the fantastic economic analysis people to come in and start talking to them about diversifying revenue. So we came up with an idea of getting students involved. These students who have been focusing on analyzing projects and analyzing cost benefit analysis and analyzing how to come up with ideas that focused on not harming marginalized communities. So they brought this problem to my students of how you diversify revenue without impacting the at-risk residents within the city of East St. Louis. So students, we had about 25 students in this class. They were all put into teams of 5. They were tasked to meet with the city economic developers. They met with the financial individuals from the financial piece of the city of East St. Louis. They met with the mayor and they met with the economic developer. They worked in groups to develop potential revenue sources. So they looked at how revenue was already generated by the city of East St. Louis and other potential avenues for diversifying these revenue sources. They had to evaluate the potential effects of these policies of putting in whatever thing that they came up with, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Some were amusement tax, some were wheel tax, some was vending machine tax, but they had to talk about the effects, the good and the bad. What money could be raised? How could this affect employment in the area? But what bad things might happen? How might this make it more expensive for businesses to operate there? Or how might it make it more detrimental for certain groups? With this, with each of their team groups, they had to draft a written report, which we ended up bringing together all the written reports, getting them nicely put together, professionally edited so that they were given to the city afterwards. And they had to give a presentation to the city on these proposed solutions. So everything from the description of this type of tax to how it would matter in East St. Louis to potential effects, so on and so forth. So the students were extremely creative. The 5 that they came up with was an amusement tax. So if you're unaware of amusement taxes, this is taxes on things such as concerts, relays, rallies, things coming into the area, and additional tax related to that. But they had to think about what was the impact of this? How would it affect employment if there was additional taxes? Would this make it so that people would be dissuaded from bringing their event to the city of East St. Louis? They also thought about commercial property citations, vending machine taxes, wheel taxes, and even business licensing permit fees. So when they go to apply to become a business, having some additional tax related to that as well. One of the great parts about this 8-week project, where they ended up working with local business or with the local government, they also went to the city of East St. Louis. Often they talked to local business owners, they talked to employees there, and they were very engaged within the community. And this project ended up resulting in several internships for the students. So I thought that that was very neat. And I think it's also important. Many of you I know are not within business schools, but if there are other people out there who are in business schools like me, you would be aware that in 2020, the AACSB changed their accreditation standards to now include societal impact. So having projects like this where students go work within the communities is very important for proving that AACSB accreditation piece of societal impact. This is a fun way of getting students involved. Now, some things worked and some things didn't work. There were lots of good. Students came to me afterwards telling me how confident they were. Many of them applied for jobs in local governments that they didn't plan to do before. They plan to become more active, working with and engaging with members of the local and state governments in their own businesses and in their own goals. So this confidence, I think, was the real win of this particular project. It also benefited that local leaders were very impressed with the creativity of the students, to the point where we now have future projects lined up with the city of Bethalto and other cities in the area that would love to have the students work with them and help them assess and think about impact. So the students got to help a community understand their finances and potential future through a new cost-effective lens. And this was really important for a city that had a large amount of their young population leaving, a city that has socioeconomic problems, a city that they need a little bit of readjustment or a new lens to think about how can you creatively encourage employment and well-being within their group. Right now, there are some things that needed improvement. We did these series of projects during COVID-19. So I think the first one was in 2020, 2021, so on and so forth. And we have another one coming up in the fall. So with COVID-19, organizing both the students and local representatives was very difficult. We did have Zoom integration, we had different accommodations available, but being able to get these leaders together with these students ended up being problematic. I think that's something that needs to be focused on in the future, is maybe more recorded conversations for the students to be able to view later with the local business leaders or with the members of the local government. There was also a lag in publishing the finished report. So like I said, I brought together all these different reports that students did. We had it professionally edited, put together in one bound presentation, in which would go to the local government. They posted it on the website, and it was super cool because many students who were applying for jobs were able to reference this material while applying for jobs. While that was very neat, it did take us a few months to get that work done. So students who were immediately on the job market weren't able to reference it. They were just able to talk to their employers about it. I think that that's a very important thing that we will try to make a faster process on in the future, so that students can have this learning outcome that they can show their potential employers. Because at the end of the day, I want my students to be active, engaged members of the community. And this is one way that I think it was really fun for them to have a unique sort of experience that they wouldn't get in a normal business classroom, to think about labor and local policy. And with that, I think that's actually all I have for now. And I'm right at my 10 minutes. So
Yeah, you really, it was a mad dash to those 10 minutes, and you did it, Alicia. Very good. She was scared. I threatened all the presenters, and I must have been a really good threat. In any case, Angela, you're up. Go ahead.
Thanks so much, Antone and the committee, for giving me the opportunity to talk a little bit about the Labor Law Clinic at Cornell Law School. It's great to hear about the really interesting experiential work that others are doing as well. So it's great to join you today. So I founded the clinic at the law school in 2005. So we've been going for quite a while now, but at the time that I started it, there really wasn't anything like it. As you may know, law schools around the country have clinics that provide services to those in need. What's unusual about this clinic is that we focus primarily on workers' collective rights and freedom of association. But we do represent and take cases and advocate on behalf of individual workers, worker centers, nonprofits. We have done a little bit of work with government agencies when they've called with issues. Once we had this question linked to sexual harassment policy, we tried to help with that, and it was rewarding, as Alicia mentioned, to engage with the government and try to make a contribution. But what I've found over the years is that experiential teaching really can be very effective. It can be very engaging for students. It's an effective way for them to learn the substantive material. It's traditional labor law that they're primarily learning, but we also sometimes deal with some other statutory issues, including issues of discrimination. So it's an effective way to learn the substantive material when students have to actually immerse in the material in order to advise clients and to represent clients through the administrative process. And they're also learning valuable skills, the kinds of skills that we really want our law students to learn, you know, interviewing, counseling, research, writing, sometimes even some trial related skills if they have to take a case to an arbitration. So what I thought I would do is share this screen. Okay, which is the website for the Labor Law Clinic. So I thought I would just use that as a tool to describe some of the work that we do in the clinic and the type of work that we do. So let's go to domestic. So we deal with both a domestic and international work. The domestic work is frequently involving unfair labor practice charges before the NLRB. And that includes both protected concerted activity claims. So that's just a worker, you know, that tries to improve with other workers terms and conditions in the workplace and ends up suffering some kind of adverse action, maybe termination. And we take those cases to the NLRB. We also take union organizing cases to the NLRB, bargaining violations and things of that nature. Cases before the board are so well suited for students because the board is an easy agency to deal with. Obviously, we don't always prevail, but we have had some success in getting back pay, and we've even gotten front pay on behalf of terminated workers. The other large category of cases that we take in the clinic would be a grievance arbitration under a collective bargaining agreement. So when a worker is terminated and they're covered by a collective bargaining agreement, often we are contacted and we will represent that worker before a neutral arbitrator. And so in that circumstance, students have the ability to really enhance trial-related skills. Of course, it's an evidentiary hearing, and so there's an opening statement. They have to deal with evidentiary issues, the direct and cross-examination, post-arbitration brief. So it's a lot of focused skill development, and for law students, it's really idyllic in many ways as far as just the enhancement and development of skills. And I agree with Alicia that confidence, this is all confidence building. I sometimes tell my students that in sports and law, confidence is important. And so the confidence that they get through actually representing a client or assisting and realizing that they have the capacity to make a contribution and to make a difference in a very important or a case involving, let's say, a terminated worker who has really suffered hardship. It can be very powerful for that student. So we also, as I mentioned, represent clients in the administrative process through, let's say, with discrimination claims. So before the Human Rights Division in New York or the EEOC, That's not quite as rich as going before the NLRB, but because it takes much longer and the investigation is normally not as in depth, and the agencies are generally not as easy to deal with as the NLRB, but nevertheless, it's still important skill development, and we do take often race or national origin claims, sometimes sex, sometimes disability claims. Now, in addition to the domestic cases, we also handle some international work that involves drafting reports that are filed with UN bodies, shadow reports linked to freedom of association or labor rights in different countries. We have filed reports under the Universal Periodic Review process that monitors countries' compliance with their treaty obligation and focusing exclusively on labor issues. And we've done reports on Haiti, Saudi Arabia, Zimbabwe, the Philippines, Indonesia, India, and we've also done ILO related work, OECD work, and this is all client driven work. So just to give you a little bit of the graphics, this is from Colombia. Students were working on a report on Colombia when we took this picture on freedom of association. And this is in Cambodia. Students were taking affidavits of terminated garment workers in a case. We end up doing a lot of work in international work linked to the garment industry. This is an arbitration. That's arbitrator Anner in the background. This was a termination case where these 3 students represented the union and the grievant in the matter that resulted in a good settlement. This is a case, these are students that represented an African-American worker who fell asleep on the job, was fired, but white workers who had fallen asleep had been given numerous warnings. They were able to get that worker reinstated. And so that was an incredibly rewarding experience for them. This is another arbitration. Well, these are students who represented another arbitration case before arbitrator Burin. The case involved a woman who was accused of stealing. They prevailed. She was reinstated and got full back pay. This is, just another sample. These are students and the client in an arbitration matter. So that gives you a sense of the type of work that we do in the clinic. For me, it's really a meaningful. Why? Well, because collective rights are different for me. Collective rights means that, basically when we're helping one individual with the case, we might actually be helping hundreds or even thousands of members of that bargaining unit. And so that is meaningful for me, because I think that freedom of association is a fundamental right. So it's nice to be able to expose students and to engage students with those issues that I think are meaningful and valuable, and to have them acquire skills that are absolutely transferable no matter what kind of law these students end up doing. I get students that practice both on the management side and the union side. And I don't, limit in any way based on what side they're going to be practicing. All of my students zealously represent their clients, and they take away skills and substantive knowledge that I hope will be used and applied, whether they practice in labor and employment or in another area. And they get to satisfy certain pro bono requirements for the practice of law in New York, something that Alicia referred to. Having to require, having to fulfill certain requirements regarding public service. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Angela, thank you. You did a great job also here with that time thing, beyond just giving us a lot of information. Robert, I got to tell you, you're under a lot of pressure here because you're preceded by two people who are right on the clock. We appreciate it. Go ahead, Robert. You're up.
Thanks, Antone. Do you see my slides?
Yep.
Okay, excellent. I'll get started. So I'm Rob Hickey. I'm on the faculty in the Employment Relations Unit at Queen's University. So let me just give a quick background. If you're like me, Alicia, I was actually born and raised in St. Louis. So I was excited to see that area referenced. Like most Americans, when I was told that, well, Queen's University is hiring, I thought, well, I'd love to live in Ireland, but I don't want to live in Belfast because that was the only Queen's University I'd heard of. But we're actually a medium-sized Canadian university tucked in close to the north shore of Lake Ontario. Essentially, if you take I-81 due north from Ithaca, from Cornell, you drive for 3 hours and you run into Kingston. So we're right on the border there. We're mostly known as an undergraduate university in Canada, although our particular program, the Industrial Relations program, has focused on our graduate program, and so undergraduate teaching is relatively new to us. And the course that I'm focused on is an undergraduate course. It's a second-year course, although upper-year students may take it. I ended up having 150 students in the course in the fall, and I suspect that interest in occupational health and safety, which historically hasn't been a particular juicy topic in the past, was driven by COVID and COVID awareness. Previous offerings of the course, I may have gotten 30 or 40 students. So this turned out to be a larger lecture. Most of our students, of course, don't have work experience. Some do, but generally that's a factor that I consider in the course design and the experiential learning activity I'm going to talk about. The biggest contrast between when I was TAing Mylar courses, so courses at Cornell versus coming to Queen's as a junior faculty member, was Canadians kind of get unions, and there isn't the assumption that, well, if you're getting an advanced degree in this area, that you're going to be anti-union, or that in order to be a manager, you have to be anti-union. I think there's a much better understanding in a general sense in our student population on the roles of unions and kind of some of those associated regulations of work and employment. And finally, the other factor I had to consider was taking 150 students into a hazardous workplace probably wouldn't pass the lawyers doing risk assessments at the university. So I couldn't take a field trip to a rail yard or to an industrial setting. So how was I going to achieve that? Let me just talk a little bit about what prompted me to go this route. And Alicia, I would argue that, well, we're all talking about experiential learning, whether it's kind of a community service learning project like yours, clinical or apprenticeship practices like Angela, or mine, which is more classroom based given the size of the cohort. But it's all about how do we move beyond the reading and listening and get students engaged in applications, the doing, the kind of case-based or simulation-based activities that I've increasingly shifted to over the 16 years or so that I've been at Queen's. The other thing I think is really important in engaging in this kind of teaching activity is to really start from the learning outcomes, or what others had mentioned as competencies. And that's exactly how I approach my course design and course building, course development is, well, what are the skills and competencies that we want students to get out of this? And, we certainly have that kind of academic focus, but we also are informed by the professional association. So here in Ontario, it's the Human Resource Professional Association, but I've also looked at the Society of Human Resource Management in the States and other kind of competency models, and specifically looking at, well, what kind of occupational health and safety competencies do they talk about? So there are managerial competencies in this course, understanding why do we have the particular model of health and safety that we do in Canada, which, while very similar to the States, has unique features like the internal responsibility system or other kinds of features to the approach in Canada. Certainly legal knowledge, understanding the legislative framework, understanding the roles of stakeholders, employees, unions, managers, owners, and those factors were part of it. But the focus is, how do I develop applied skills, and how do I help students develop the competencies associated with applied skills, like identifying and assessing workplace hazards, and then developing hazard control strategies based upon the key concepts within occupational health and safety. And the last piece in terms of course development I want to emphasize is that, well, in order to make experiential learning truly engaging, I have to be aware that it needs to align with the rest of the course. So class activities, again, focused on case studies and simulation exercises, need to link in some way with assignments. So the activity that I described in this short presentation wasn't graded, but they're developing the skills for the assignments that will be graded. So doing assignments around case studies, having reflections around simulations, and then moving those to align with the intended learning outcomes or the competencies. So again, I think I've kind of learned through trial and error that just jumping to an activity without really thinking about how does this fit in with the overall course design, how does it develop and support the intended learning outcomes. Sometimes I would, before doing this, I would implement simulations that were just far too complex. And so the clarity of what I was hoping students would get out of it was kind of overwhelmed by the complexity of the case. So developing cases that hit students where they're at in terms of a second year course is the last piece to this. Now, the particular experiential learning component in this simulation exercise I explored was the application of virtual reality based experiential learning. And I'll give you a quick example of what that looks like. And how I came into this was I was at an IBEW event, so the electrical workers event, and I met someone from BitSpace Development. It's a small shop developing virtual reality training initially for the IBEW in Canada. So how do we apply necessary training without the cost and being able to scale for the union? And so that relationship was really key. The case itself was fairly straightforward. So identify a hazard, assess the hazard, not just the likelihood and the impact, but what factors are associated with the hazard, and then apply hazard control protocols to say, this is how we eliminate the hazard or mitigate the potential harm. And so, Antone, I'm going to try and do my technical jujitsu here. Do you see a strange image now?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so you see this kind of work site. Okay, so this is what they developed for me. This is a 3-case platform. So in the first case, they would go into this area and they'd be in a construction zone. And so they'd have to kind of walk through these rooms, identify hazards, describe how they pose risk to human health and safety, and then develop their control strategies. And so there were, a number of different rooms to look at, these kind of confined spaces, working at heights, and then a more open construction space. And again, I didn't give a lot of direction in terms of what to look for other than the primary sources of hazards and the primary types of hazards. And I'll share that in just a minute. There were a few other work sites I'll just highlight here briefly. I was able to bring them to a rail yard, so a CN rail yard, and again, looking around the site, seeing that workers are in training, and seeing that I don't know what this particular work process involves, but obviously it involves molten metal and the hazards associated with that, and then being out on the tracks themselves. And then the last one was to give a final stretch of student experience in diverse workplaces, which was a pig farm. So having students think about, well, given agricultural workplaces, what kinds of hazards would they identify at a pig farm? And so these were the sites that I brought them to, and I asked them to essentially, at the construction site, think about the sources, people, environment, processes, and think about the nature of the types of hazards, physical, biological, psychosocial, and to do that for the CN safety system as well. And so just to conclude with a few reflections, I'd say the VR experience worked okay, but it didn't quite engage students as immersively as I had hoped. In part, I think this is because these are kind of static 360 images. The interactive components are limited and problematic, but perhaps more importantly is that I can't compete, or our little virtual reality partners can't compete with the experiences that students have from the gaming industry, right? And I wanted to have real images, but the technology for those types of interactive walkthroughs simply weren't available yet in terms of developing that. The other challenge was the equipment. So in most VR training vendors will have the whole suite of headsets and increasingly what we call augmentative reality. So things on your hands and other motion detectors on your body. So you're actually kind of physically engaging in a virtual reality or augmented reality context. I do think that there were things to learn and draw from and build on from this. And I think in particular, the visual learning experience is something that I still want to figure out. Maybe I need to adjust to VR and look for better technologies, but having a case study with a visual component just seems so critical to me in the field of occupational health and safety. I don't see how you can get around providing that kind of experiential opportunity for students. The class size that I had to have some TA support to kind of work out the logistics. And the other thing that I did come to rely on was some improvements in government produced training materials. So here in Canada, the WorkSafe BC in particular, they're coming out with better training material. So in particular, video-based case studies that I was able to incorporate turned into a good alternative to that kind of virtual reality approach, where it provides some visuals of the work site, focusing on core concepts within occupational health and safety and its applications in terms of analyzing workplace injuries and illnesses. So I'll stop there, Antone. Hopefully I was nearly as concise as others, but close.
Well, you were very close. I will say I decided not to interrupt you. I don't want to start a border war here, particularly since I'm very close to the border. In any case, as I recall from our conversation, I grew up across the river from you. Again, I want to protect Watertown from invasion. All right, guys, I want to thank all of our presenters. I learned something from each of these. It gives us some ideas. And very frankly, in every case, I was trying to connect what I see happening at school to what, in fact, you folks are doing. And it's just really exciting. So at this point, I'd like to open it up for questions. And you can do this one of two ways. You can put something into the chat pod if you're shy. And don't want to ask. If you want to ask, just raise your hand. You can actually, very frankly, we have a small group, unmute yourself and just start talking. As long as you don't interrupt anyone else, I think would be good. So who would like to talk? Who'd like to say something? Ask something. Go ahead, Carla. Thank you.
Jump right in.
Yeah, go ahead.
All the presentations were great, and I learned from something from each of you. So thank you. That was extremely interesting and useful. I do have a question for Robert about technology. It wasn't clear to me whether you used headsets or not. You know, my kids use Oculus, right? Oculus Quest. And I tried it myself for the first time this year, and it's stunning. I mean, you really feel like you are inside this reality. So was it that, or was it sort of just video?
So that was the key challenge, and Paul Clark might appreciate that if I went to my department head and said, I need $10,000 for headsets for my class, it wouldn't go anywhere, right? They do have kind of cheaper versions, cardboard boxes that you can put your smartphone in, but even that was, cost prohibitive when you have 150 students. So I ended up having them put the platform on so students could just use their laptops, which they would normally bring to class anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Who else would like to speak? Anyone? Please chime in.
Yeah, that issue, Robert, is an issue. We were doing some virtual reality work here at Penn State, and I know they developed segments for a course on Roman history where they had the person actually standing in the Colosseum in Rome and, had them walking through the corridors and going down underneath. I immediately thought, in our introductory courses, in our labor history courses, we always talk about the Homestead strike battle between the Pinkertons and the steelworkers in Homestead, Pennsylvania. And there's a site still there on the river called Pump House, which is where the battle took place in 1892. And we've tried to do sort of field trips to historical labor sites in Pennsylvania, and it's just, the logistics aren't great. And I thought, if we could do this sort of virtual reality thing where we get the students standing on the side of the Monongahela River and sort of put them in the position of the steelworkers as the Pinkertons came up. But then this is in a class of 150 to 200 students. They tried those cardboard things and they didn't seem to work very well. It seems to have potential, but I'm not quite sure we're at a place where we can, do this cost effectively for a significant number of students.
Paul, in cost effective isn't just the equipment. When in one of our courses, one of our faculty in our school put just one simple module in place that illustrated a progressive discipline activity. So basically, it was nothing more than you're in a room and you're talking, and it looks like you're actually talking to somebody. And it cost, I forget how much to create. The amount of labor that went into producing this one activity was huge. And so it's not just the equipment, it's actually creating really useful, I'm trying to think of the right word, scripts, I guess, that are actually acted out. It's really odd. Okay. Anyone else on this issue before we go? Go ahead, Angela. Go ahead. You're not muted. You're muted, Angela.
It's not on this issue in case somebody wants to.
That's okay. Go ahead, Angela. You raised your hand. You get it. Go ahead.
Okay. Robert, I was wondering, do students work in teams to sort out the risks? I really enjoyed the presentation. I was just wondering, do students collaborate together in trying to find, the risks and evaluate the risks? Yes.
Exactly. So they would work in groups of 2 or 3, and they'd have essentially 3 things that they had to do: identify all the risks in the various scenes, say a couple of words about assessing those risks. So, what's the nature? Is it biological? Is it physical? Is it psychosocial? And then articulate hazard control. So again, making sure that they're applying the hierarchy of control so that they're trying to eliminate the hazard in the first place. And if they can't eliminate, are they using, engineering, administrative, or PPE controls to mitigate the harm?
Sounds great.
I have another question. I don't want to monopolize, but this is for Angela. Actually, somebody and Michelle put something in first, if you want to answer that first. My question, and save it for after Angela, Michelle's, but is just a little more specificity about understanding how the students work in clinics when they're working directly with the public. Are they supervised by an attorney? Do they work in groups, right? Because they're not lawyers yet. So what is the liability and, concern that they're providing the correct, legal advice, et cetera?
Thanks for the question, Carla. Yeah, we have to supervise every step of the way. So we work very closely with our clinic students. Classes are very small, like 8 to 10 students. So that's challenging for some institutions, but most law schools in the US have clinical programs and their classes are very small like that, because we have to closely supervise the legal representation and the legal work that that they're doing.
Thank you, Angela. We do have a question from Anne Michelle Marsden. Anne Michelle has laryngitis. I think otherwise she'd be happy to speak. And it's for Angela again, so let's stay on the same topic. Do your students engage in any DEI training around their experience?
I'm excuse my ignorance, but
diversity,
okay,
inclusion, equity and inclusion. Yeah.
Okay. Well, no, regrettably, and Michelle, I don't. We do try to tackle issues of systemic racism. I mean, there's a classroom component, and in addition to covering the substantive law, we do try to deal with other issues like inequality and issues of discrimination, but I'm not an expert, and I probably should do more in that area. So I appreciate the question, and maybe I will try to explore how I can do a little bit more, because we do deal with both we deal with both race and national origin discrimination cases on a regular basis, which means some clinics have a segment on cultural competencies and things of that nature, but even I don't include that as much. And then sometimes we also deal with immigrant workers. So I probably should be doing more. So thank you for the suggestion and the question.
I was thinking more about, I'm so sorry. I was thinking more about knowing how to talk with each other and being inclusive in our dialogues with each other is what I was actually getting at. I was just being lazy using that acronym. But it was more since your group really does a lot of communication with each other. I think that would be a wonderful component, and there's plenty of great resources that you could have them read, discuss, and learn how to speak with each other and with all different sorts of people.
Yes, I agree. Thank you so much. We also do know your rights presentations to immigrant communities, so that's another area where this kind of a little more background might equip them a little bit better. Thank you.
Okay, Patrice and then Robert. Go ahead, Patrice.
Great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I was very impressed with the technology that Robert demonstrated. I teach in the Department of Public Policy and Administration. It's a small department. I teach the labor management relations. I have to cover both the private and the public sector. And I always struggle to find good sort of recent cases that are relevant to the public sector and activities. And I know Robert mentioned really innovative public sector training programs in Canada. I haven't seen anything like that, the videos for the US. So I'm curious for the panelists if you have any suggestions on innovative things to do with a class that has to cover both the private and public sector, but I try to put more emphasis on the public since my students are going to work mainly in government and nonprofit organizations.
Alicia, your project was basically a public sector project. Would you have anything to add there? And then we'll
Yeah.
pass it on to Robert.
So my students work directly with local governments, and that was based off of relationships that I had sort of built. I'd go to town hall meetings, I would talk to people, and then the cities ended up getting more and more interested. One thing that I've found is sometimes it's very difficult to get good examples from the public sector. I'm sure you're aware at this point, which means that I have two real toolkit things that I use. It's either one, I go and I actually meet with people. So for example, there's the National Conference of State Legislators that often talk about things related to labor policy. That's a really great place to, if you want to just have another conference on your yearly record, go in, talk to some people. Many of them have the materials, they're just not publicly available. So many of them can give you this information. Other things that I tend to use when all else fails is FOIA requests. When dealing with the public sector, FOIA is our best friend. Just be aware that there are limitations and it's going to take time most times to be able to get information back. But if there's a particular thing that you're interested in or you'd like more information on, or you'd like to know what those impacts were, I think FOIA is a great way to at least be able to collect data and information to develop your own case studies.
Thank you, Alicia. Robert, do you have anything you want to add to that?
Well, no, it's a good segue to my question, which is for Alicia as well, which is kind of focused on how she developed that community partnership, and more specifically, what role did the community partner have in this? So it seems like you kind of set out the nature of the problem for the students, or did the students talk to public officials to get some input? And did the students present their reports to the officials? And did you, as the instructor, get any feedback from your community partners on student assessments?
Oh yeah, so actually I got answers to all of those. So I'll try, that was a lot of questions at once. We'll see if I manage to remember them all. So how I initially started working with the community partners was I would just get involved in many different county meetings to be able to go meet local government people. Once I started to meet the economic developers, we started talking about forecasting, things like that. Building relationships is really important to me, especially with local communities. So I've worked with Gillespie, Bethalto, City of East St. Louis, many smaller places around here because they're accessible. They love when someone's interested and actually wants to help out and come talk to them. Well, what I would initially do with these different community partners is I would meet with them to look at what range of services they might need and how the university might be able to help provide some of these things for them. And most of the time, it's actually a range of things. Some of it might be impact studies that my department does that are most appropriate for the faculty. But when thinking about low cost options of being able to get engagement for the students, which is beneficial from our side, but also results for local communities of understanding some of these projects or the students take on them. Those were the projects that we sort of like listened to what they were needing. And then I would identify, okay, well, this might actually be a great experiential learning activity with this community partner. I'd talk to them and we'd make very clear with the community partner what the expectations were. So here's the research question that we are trying to answer. Understand that these are students, so it comes with a range of potential problems and they need to be aware of this. They're not experts in their field yet, they're working to be experts in their field. And working together with that, we come to some sort of understanding, which we would write down in just a memorandum of understanding so that we were all on the same page. And that's when we started to get the students involved. So the students were at the point where we already had the research question or the need identified. And then we would allow for a lot of creativity with the students after that on how these reports would go. Now, they did end up both submitting these reports to the local government officials, but also presenting their results in front of them, right? This is our idea, and all of them would come in, and then their teams of 5, they'd present what their idea was of these impacts would be, what their expected, intended, and unintended impacts might be. And it's a really interesting and fun thing to do. And I did end up getting a lot of feedback through the community partners. Most of this was through, we would meet up on Zoom afterwards and sort of debrief about the projects, how they felt about the expectations, how they felt, did we meet kind of the key needs that they needed. And so far the community partners have been happy. We haven't had a failure of a project yet, though I'm sure, you know, eventually it may happen, but so far this open communication in between the community partners and myself, I think has really made it so we've been able to streamline it to what their needs are.
Okay, thank you, Alicia. Appreciate it. Anyone else with a question? Anybody?
Antone, if
Yeah.
I may,
Hey, Paul.
it's sort of an elaboration on the diversity question. Maybe for Alicia, my guess is that your students are mostly white and the local officials are mostly black. And I wonder if you can address that. It seems like that sort of weaves in diversity of a kind right into the program. Can you just reflect on that and what the student
Sure.
experience is like, and then what the local officials experience is like?
So you're right, we are a Midwestern school. I would say 85% of my students are white. In that class, we did have some representation among marginalized communities, but it was small. With these students, before they took my class, most of them actually took our class on the economics of racism and inequality, which goes through a lot of DEI considerations. It talks about how economics and policies have really played a role in keeping systemic racism alive in some places, and how we identify those and how we address them and how we try to think about our own biases. So many students have had an entire semester before they even get to me trying to think about these issues and working within communities where people may not look like them, right? Or there might be some sort of differences, and how do you address your own biases when going into that situation? The local community members, I think we're also a little weirded out by the idea that there were a bunch of students who were predominantly white, college educated, coming in to give them information. I think how we were able to bridge that gap was, one, by just talking to the students up front to let them know, like, this is what the local population is like. This is how you are different, and we need to understand how we are approaching this, and how lifestyles or goals might be different, or how different outcomes might be different, or why a lot of problems that this community is facing is not necessarily the problem of this community. It might be ingrained issues that have happened over years and decades that was kind of beyond their control. So having these open and honest conversations, I think, with the students, and the fact that most of them had this previous training and thinking about racism and inequality through an economic lens, made it so I don't think we had much of a problem in this course. I think the students were very respectful of differences, and I think the community partners were also very respectful of the idea that, like, hey, they had help coming in, and we were all working together as a team in a team-focused environment. So while it's something that we may not have directly spoke about as much, I think it's something that is very cognizant for my students, that they have been already working with before they even got to my course.
Thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one more question, quick question, and then I want to make a couple wrap-up comments. Anybody have a final issue they'd like to raise? Well, I come from a family that never had an unexpressed thought, so let me conclude this. First of all, I want to thank our presenters. They did a great job. I must tell you, I like to think I'm always the brightest bulb in the room, but I realize when I come to these things how much I have to learn. So thank you so much, all of you. Really great. And it gives the rest of us ideas about how we can improve our classrooms, which is what this is all about. And with respect to that, the teaching section interest group is something, as I said at the beginning, is new here at Lyra. And at this point, I'm not sure we have many members, but I want to encourage anybody here who is not yet a member, when you go in and renew your membership each year, to click that teaching section group and join us. We have a variety of issues we want to address. Can't do everything all at once, but we will begin work probably this summer on thinking how we can execute our agenda. And I want to thank you all for coming today. I know it's been a great conference. I've got to tell you, I've been to a lot of things. Want to thank Paul Clark, of course, is responsible. I'm sure personally, is it personally responsible, Paul, for everything that goes on? Do you have to take total responsibility, or were there others we can share? But they've done a great job, absolutely, in this whole thing. So thank you, everybody. Take care. Have a great day. Bye-bye.
Remember
Thanks,
to stop
Antone.
recording. Oh, well, he left.
Antone, nice pick of the three. They were